Good morning, everybody. This is Doug Franks, getting ready to present this morning on the updates to the Bridge and Structures Design Manual. We call it our February revision or winter revision, whatever the case. I was going to tell everybody that we were proud to be broadcasting to 4,000 individuals in 37 countries this morning, but I don't think anybody would believe me. A lot of people are probably asking, why did we schedule this presentation on Valentine's Day? And I think the answer to that is clear to all of us. And that is that we love bridges. So today's little celebration of bridges will walk us through a couple dozen revisions that we've made to the manual, give you guys a couple heads up about some things that are coming down the pipe, and hopefully won't take us too terribly long to work through. As usual, we have a team of people who are monitoring the chat, and so you guys can fire in some questions or comments as you feel the need, and they have opportunity. They can respond to you, they can respond to the group, they can stop me dead in my tracks to address the issue, any of those things. So, all right, so let's get going. First, I want to thank the usual suspects here, our GPTQ committee. This is the 2002 committee that has just recently rolled off, so we thank you for your service, and we've got a new team that'll be helping us now. And today, I want to highlight Brian Stocks. He is our AV team guy. He's always in the background making us look good, and I really just appreciate him and all the help that he gives us. All right, this is just a heads up for everybody. I'm imagining that this is not new information, but just in case it is, MathCAD 15 and PTC has decided MathCAD 15 is no longer a viable product for them, and so they have shut it down as of the end of 2021 actually, and then there were some extensions in that allowed us to keep using it, but all of that is slowly coming to an end. And I know I've heard some horror stories from different firms that they woke up one day and their MathCAD didn't work anymore. So this is just a heads up that if your MathCAD 15 is still working, it may not work for much longer, and you need to be on top of that and be aware of it. We tried to get ahead of it, I guess you'd say, as much as we could. We've gone ahead and written or rewritten our programs in MathCAD Prime 7, which is at the time was the newest version of Prime that was out. And at present, we are currently receiving our uploads for MathCAD Prime 8. So it is my belief that there is compatibility with all of that stuff. You never really know until you try it, but that's our thinking. So the MathCAD Prime 7 versions of our internal design software, or whatever you want to call it, those have all been uploaded to the website. Both the MathCAD 15 is there and the MathCAD Prime 7. And if we find any problems with MathCAD Prime 8 compatibility, we will try to address that as quickly as possible. Couple things that are around the corner here for us. Everybody is, I think, aware that there's been some changes to the Georgia regulations that are requiring on how PE stamps should be applied to plans. The changes to those rules, were largely driven by the department and the massive plan sets that we put out. We are going to be putting out a little bit more concise explanation from the bridge office in the next month or two that just sort of lays out, exactly what we mean on all these different things with applying a stamp, where we want it, how we want it. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a couple slides, but just to let you know, we're feeling it out ourselves, and we're addressing it with our legal department, and want to make everybody just aware so they know what the expectation is. Also, we are working on some modifications or guidance document, a modification of process, I guess is the best way to put it, regarding our use of Bluebeam Studio and Bluebeam Review, Bluebeam Studio sessions. So In the coming weeks, probably to maybe months, we will be putting out a guidance document that will help everybody just be on the same page and create a very uniform submission and review process. And so be on the lookout for that. We'll make sure we announce it on the chat, and it'll certainly be a part of our next manual revision, in the spring or early summer. Not shown on this screen because it is so hot off the presses, has been made aware that our Open Bridge, I want to say workstation, that's not the right term, but we'll go with that. Work environment, whatever the environment for Open Bridge is, has been finalized, and we are in the final stages of getting that organized so that we can load it up on the website for all of you to access. So that should be, again, in the next couple of weeks to month. I would think that will be loaded up. And again, we'll announce it through the chat. As is usually the case when we put out a manual revision, we kind of look to use that same timeline to update general notes. In this case this is no different. We've done just a very few revisions really this time to the general notes. A couple of them we'll talk about in the article revisions because they correspond, but there was a change to our original bridge plan notes just to catch us up with the website modifications that happened a year or so ago, if you guys remember that. So there's just a new HTML reference in there, and just added a few other notes that you can be aware of there. That information has all been uploaded onto the website, and so you just go to our page and to the software page, MicroStation customizations, and that content is there. Just a note that if you're a fresh downloader of the Bridge Notes program, you have to download the program and then download the most recent content separately. They don't automatically update. The content is the higher thing on the structure. Okay, so diving into articles, like I said, we do have some things to say about the PE stamp. We made some small modifications, sort of general, in 1431 and 1441, which are our preliminary plan submissions and final plan submissions. I guess the thing I would highlight most is in the preliminary plan submissions, we still really just want to stamp on there so that we can see who the engineer is that's responsible for the work that's being submitted. Then with the final plan submission, with our sort of checklist type presentation that we have there in the manual, we added to that list the stamping sheet. I don't know if that's its official name or not, but the stamping sheet concept of 01000X. So we want that to be submitted with final plan submission so we can, again, see who's responsible and just get a chance to review that sheet as part of the bridge plans. I would note at the bottom here of the screen, you'll see in these days we do some contracts with y'all where the majority of the contract is driven by the consultant, but there's a component of it which is a bridge design element from our office. And when that is the case, the chief engineer will be stamping on behalf of the department and on behalf of us in the bridge office. So we need a stamping sheet for her to stamp. And so that needs to be its own sheet. It might be the case that you guys are using one sheet for multiple stamps to represent the rest of your plan set. But with the bridge plans that are done by GDOT, we want that to be a specific isolated sheet just for Ms. Perkle to sign. So just be aware of that and coordinate with your bridge liaison if you have that situation. Another quick little footnote in chapter 1, just made reference and directive to look at the detailing manual, which Eric Fleckenstein did a great job of presenting to everybody just a couple months ago. So we're pointing to that to say, hey, at the end of the project, when everything is done and approved, we really want to get a copy of the DGNs or the CAD files. And you can look at the detailing manual for some guidance on what that should look like or what those formatting should be. And we want to keep those just as part of the permanent record so that we have it for reference, we have it for use, whatever the case is down the road. You never know when a bridge is going to be hit or replaced or something else. So it's helpful to have those on hand. Moving into chapter 2, we made some modifications in chapter 2. We used to call this section sidewalk live load. We've modified it to refer to the pedestrian load, which is what's referenced in the AASHTO, and sort of refined the approach there. We had an overly simplified statement in that section previously that just called for a distribution of the loads across the beams. But really, when it comes to substructure design and consideration of your live loads on the structure, AASHTO calls for a more robust consideration of those things, including the use of multiple presence factors, etc. And so we've added in a directive to say for your beam design, we can do some uniform distribution, but for your overall structure and substructure design, we need to follow the guidance in the code. All right, and we added a section to 2.2 that is, a section for lateral loads, trying to take a little bit of an opportunity to explain how we want those lateral loads to be applied to the structure and how we want them to be resolved. So that's been updated. You can check that out. There's a corresponding element to that in chapter 4 as well, talking about the consideration of the stiffness of substructure elements when you're doing sort of your lateral load distribution in the substructures. We've revamped the vertical clearance section. You'll remember a couple iterations of the manual ago, we went in and changed sort of our reference point for lane configurations and bridge widths, and we associated those with functional classification. And so we've done the same thing now with vertical clearance to go in there and associate the vertical clearance required to the functional classification of the road that's being crossed. So you can look at that. Also just try to clarify a little bit of the requirements as far as whether you're required to have that vertical clearance value over just the travelway or just the lanes or the shoulders or what have you. Just tried to paint a little clearer picture for everybody to use. This one is always exciting when we get the railroad involved. CSX has for quite some time had a statement in their public projects manual that they want people like us to span their right of way, which is usually a pretty good distance. And for a long time, we were quick to get a exception for that filed on our behalf, but those days are sort of passing on, and now we're trying our best to accommodate their requirement. And so that's now been put into the manual that if you are working over CSX, start with the perspective that you need to try to span the right of way and then work backwards from that, as opposed to, I think maybe our tendency before was to just ignore that and design the structure that we kind of wanted to have instead of the one they asked us to make. So look into that a little bit. And I would note too, that is a CSX specific requirement. I've read some documents recently where people were trying to attribute that same requirement to Norfolk Southern. And at least as of right this moment, Norfolk Southern has not sort of laid down that law. So, but that's a CSX concern. Made a slight modification regarding skewed bridges. We had some statements in there about how we wanted you to sort of bring a highly skewed bridge up for discussion in the concept phase if we thought that it was going to be 45 degrees. And we realized at the concept phase it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what you're going to have down to the 1 degree mark. And so we've just sort of expanded that a little bit to say, hey, if it looks like it's going to be 50 degrees or so, let's go ahead and talk about it and see if there's a better alternative that we can use. We added a section now in 2.9 where we try to address a little bit the concept of median barriers. Somehow we've managed to avoid that all this time. So just it outlines what to do, in some pretty basic terms, whether if you have alignments that are running along the same profile or have the edges match the profile, or if they diverge from one another, sort of how you want to approach it or how we want you to approach it from a design standpoint. So that's been added in there. We also made just some tweaks really to the presentation about concrete vents. Someone had posted the question, well, what do we mean by a concrete vent? And even though we kind of all felt like, well, everybody knows what that is, we decided it was good to put that into the manual, sort of describe what a concrete vent is, and then also sort of present differently when we feel like those are necessary to be used beyond a pile vent structure, intermediate pile vent. So that's now been modified and updated. Temporary barrier has been modified slightly. The change in language there is really, it's just about how we want to quantify those things on a bridge replacement project. Language before really said, hey, we want the road designer to put it in the roadway plans. Now it's leaning more towards, if it's just a bridge replacement project, the temporary barrier is probably only being used at the bridge. So that's a way we want to kind of look at it, and that's sort of the practice as of late, is to put those quantities then into the bridge summary of quantities. All right, chapter 3, getting into the superstructure items. We've added a little bit of language to the anchorage zone. Seems like we keep refining a little more on the clearances, the rebar spacing and clearances there in the anchorage zone, because there's so much steel. One thing that is true for us is that those confinement bars, the doghouse bars, some people refer to them as, they don't ever come as one piece. It's always a bundle, and so you've got that overlap at the bottom of the beam. So we've highlighted that now in the manual to point that out as an assumption that should be made. We've also kind of began to address, or have addressed, the idea of bundling stirrups in that anchorage zone, again, because things are so congested. And so it gives you a little bit of an outline when you get to a place where you just can't get the clearance you need. It tells you how you can shift things around a little bit and bundle to get some clearance back. Threw in just a quick note in 3.4 to address stay-in-place deck forms. I think we had received some questions about this, and I'm largely driven by the design build world, I think. In this picture here, you can see these are our typical panels, but they've been infilled with foam. In this case, it looks like it's a rigid foam. I've heard of even the use of a spray type foam, but we don't want that to be a design solution. Potentially that's like a Hail Mary solution at the end of some problem, but from the design side, we want you to just use the standard 16 pounds, assuming that we're using the metal deck forms as just the material themselves. In 3.6, we added a little bit of information about, or revised a little information about the weathering steel. Seems like when we're doing any sort of steel structure these days, most of the time we're using weathering. Also added into that section and an associated section information about painting. This is a good picture here on the screen. It shows you, we do some end painting and try to match those colors as best we can. Us bridge engineers spot that a mile away, but hopefully the traveling public doesn't notice it too much, and it does protect those beam ends. So that whole topic is addressed in 3.6. Made a small modification to section 3.8. We had some guidance in there directing towards the use of doing New England Extreme T, or the next beam. Next beam type F was our default approach previously, but having built a few of those and sort of wrestled with their application, we're going to lean instead towards the next D beam. So next F has a cast in place deck on the top, and the next D does not. It would just have a wearing surface applied. So just a tool in the toolbox there for your ABC, low volume type structures. And 313, the first thing we've modified there is just a little bit of guidance on pour strips. There was some confusion, or pretty common confusion, about pour strips. We call for those to be poured with AA concrete, and since the rest of the deck is Class D, people were trying to decide, well, we're supposed to, add in a new pay item or a new quantity for the pour strip AA, or what do we need to do? And so we just cleared that up, and the short answer is no. The AA is what we require them to use in terms of the material, but we'll just quantify it with whatever the other superstructure volume is. So just gives you a little heads up on that. 313, we've made some modifications to the topic of expansion joints. The first part of that is in relation to the standard joint, or the poured joint, the silicone poured joint. The language we had in there before was a little vague. It said, something about when a joint greater than 3/4 inches is needed, but it didn't explain what criteria you might use to determine that. So now it's a little more prescriptive, explaining, calculate your range of movement, and if it's above a certain threshold, then you need to move on to a larger joint. So that's been modified. We also made modifications to the relatively recently updated section on SilicaFlex type joints, the neoprene joints. We've gotten some feedback from a number of people about when they tried to use that, kind of where it led them in terms of design. And so one of the primary things that we did, well, we added a bunch of detail. We added some detail to the calculations and the example, but one of the things we were trying to accomplish by a modification to the tables was we added in 1/8 of an inch of installation width to all of the joints. And what that did was allow a greater application range for each of the joint sizes. Basically, people were reporting, hey, we don't ever get to use a small joint. It always defaults to a medium, or we can only use a medium for just a small range, and then it's going to default to a large joint. And so by bumping these out just a little bit, that 1/8 of an inch gives you more flexibility and more application range. So that's a modification you want to look at. Quick addition was made to the manual about deck drain systems. We've got more and more deck drain systems, closed systems on bridges. Just wanted to clarify in there that, in terms of loading on the bridge, we want to assume that all of those pipes are full, that we have a plugged condition. So that was just made specifically mentioned. This next note here in chapter 4, so we're moving into the substructure stuff. We just made some changes in the reference to mass concrete and what the requirements are, what the triggers are to move to mass concrete. I've drawn that little trapezoid there, simple shape, just as a tongue-in-cheek reference. We've had some very creative substructure elements submitted that would try to get around the mass concrete. Nobody likes mass concrete, so we reworded the requirements to hopefully make everybody understand what we're shooting for, and to eliminate some of the loopholes that led to trapezoidal caps. Also added some language. Again, a lot of these I think get driven by design build type questions, but added some language to the selection of piles that just explains that if you're putting a pile in the foundation, all the piles around it should be the same. Certainly there's perhaps some economy if you were to use different pile sizes for, your outer piles and your middle piles, or whatever the case might be. And depending on the size of the footings and everything, there's ramifications to that. But we just clarified, hey, if you're going to use a pile, it's the controlling pile, apply that in all locations. So that was added in. And there was also some clarification added in about driving data piles. There was some confusion between what was in the general notes program and what was in the manual. Basically, if you're doing an LRFD project, the driving data piles concept kind of goes away for the most part, because of the PDA piles that are required for installation. And those are almost one and the same. We still want to use driving data piles on the standard spec projects. Also in chapter 4, made some additional guidance about how to lay out the steps and detail the steps and stage, and also staging joints in the end vents. So I want to check that out. And in 4.3, sort of gave some guidance on an issue that seems to have come up as of late for some reason, with some single span bridges, just addressing if you've got big 2-foot riprap and you're putting it right in front of your 2-foot cap, you potentially run into some problems with beam clearances. And so it gives some information about how to address that. Chapter 6, we finally updated the culvert manual, or the culvert table, to go with our revised culvert standards, the 2400 series. So those are updated. And we also went into chapter 7 and updated the standard supports, sign support table. I don't know how much either one of those two documents or two tables gets used really, but hopefully they are more representative of the current standards and current approach for everybody to use as a reference. All right, jumping ahead to chapter 8, just a couple finishing touches here for us, and we're almost done. The timeliness of shop drawing review, we had a little note in there that had a parenthetical statement written to the engineers that said, hey, you should probably be able to turn these plans around in 2 weeks. And for the most part, we still think that's true, but the problem was having that in print was getting us in trouble with contractors sometimes, and they were saying, well, it says 2 weeks and you've taken longer than 2 weeks. So we've removed that language. Ultimately, I think we're trying to head towards a place where we add some contract language, not in the plans, but into the specifications that would explain more clearly for our contractors what the expectation is for review time. That not only involves our office, but the Office of Design Policy and Traffic Operations. And so we're collaborating and coordinating now to try to figure that out. Probably the main thing for you to know is, if you get some shop drawings in, make them a high priority. Those people out in the field are waiting to keep going. So don't put them on the back burner. Also on that topic of shop drawings, like we mentioned at the beginning, we're sort of thinking more about PE stamps than maybe we ever have before. So in the process of doing that, we realized that the way that we archive our shop drawings sort of divides them up from the package concept that they're often submitted in. And so we are going to be asking that our contractors stamp every sheet. Okay, well, a lot of people say, well, they're supposed to stamp every sheet anyway, and that's true enough. But we're formally leaning that way, and putting this into the manual is just a heads up for reviewers so that they can be aware of that change. We haven't made, other than the fact, like you said, the Georgia rules kind of would state that, we haven't really made it a specific ask of our contractors or our suppliers yet to do that, but it's our intention to do that, and it shouldn't be too big of a deal. That they'll just revise their borders and things like that so they can stamp each sheet, and that allows each sheet to be represented by the stamp as it's put into our archive. Okay, so sort of my last nod to Valentine's Day here. We love questions, and so with that, I will sort of open the floor to my team who's been watching the chat and see what questions we have so far.
Very few questions so far, Doug. I think we're answering both of them just through the chat. One was about MicroStation files being converted to OpenBridge. I think Eric's currently working on that. The other was about, it was mentioned that the NeXTs were applicable for low volume replacements, but the bridge manual states that it's not limited based on traffic. And that is correct. The table in the bridge manual is correct. There is not a limit for the next D use based on traffic. So
Great.
and that's it.
Great. Yeah, that's good. Keep us honest. You never, I don't know everything, and I certainly misspeak on occasion. So that's good to keep us honest with those questions. I'll kill just a couple more seconds in case anybody's got another question they want to throw at us, and highlight this statement at the bottom of the page. Hopefully all of you are aware now that we do have a sort of a consultant chat that goes on. We get a fair number of questions submitted through that chat, and we certainly make a number of announcements through that chat to the consultant committee, so our community. So if you have any interest and you're not already on that chat, you can just send me an email. My address is shown there. We will, in a day or so, publish this presentation onto the chat so it's accessible for everybody. And typically we will have recorded this, assuming the recording went okay, we will post a YouTube link as well. So if there were members of your staff that couldn't be here, or if you wanted to go back and listen to something specifically, you'll have an opportunity to do that. All right, so one more check-in with Steve. Anything more, Steve?
Let's see, we've got a couple popping up. Will this presentation be available on Rhodes or on the Teams chat?
Yep, so we'll post the link on Teams chat.
Okay, is it possible to get a recording of the bridge detailing presentation that happened earlier?
I believe that we posted that to the chat, so I will double check that, and then if so, I'll pull it forward. When I make the announcement for this one, I'll include both links together. I can't remember where we ended up with that. Eric, do you remember, since you did the presentation?
Yeah, I believe we posted it and we sent it to Sean Farr as well, that he was supposed to share it with his consultant PMs to distribute. So it should be available. If not, we can post it again.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll post it with this one, just to be sure.
I got a question about the temporary barrier. Is the bridge quantity meant to be deducted from the overall roadway quantity? For example, if the project needs 600 feet and 200 feet of it is on the bridge, how much should roadway show?
I'm gonna let you take that.
I can take it. Essentially what it was changed to say is that if the temporary barrier is needed only to protect the bridge, so it's on the bridge and then tapers off immediately, then all of that temporary barrier quantity should be included with the bridge. If it's a corridor project or corridor widening or something like that, and you have temporary barrier that is both on the bridge and on the roadway, then you would deduct the amount on the bridge from the amount that's on the roadway, and the quantities would be presented separately.
All right. Anything else?
Will a 3D model be required when we switch to Open Bridge? I think the answer is no, but I'll defer to Eric on that one.
Not at this time. Currently, what we've ported over is the ability to work within the 2D aspects of Open Roads. The 3D model, the Open Bridge still needs a bit more refinement before we're ready to push that out on a mass scale.
Let's see. CSX has a statement in their manual that MSC walls are not allowed adjacent to their property. Can you provide clarity on when they are allowed or at what distance? I'll address that quickly. At this time, we're still trying to figure out that as well. If something is determined definitively, we will definitely make sure we add it, but I'm not sure it will ever be a definitive offset or directive. It'll just have to be it might be a project by project situation. For plans that are currently in final design or preliminary stages, is there a cutoff date for applying these changes to the plans currently under production? Doug, I'll leave that one to you.
That's a loaded question. So with our last manual revision, we kind of tried to hurry ourselves up a little bit. And so the short answer is when we release one of these manuals and the revisions that go with it, That's the new law of the land, effective immediately. All right. But we're not unreasonable. So if you've got something that's going to be a big heavy lift for you, a big heartache, and you want to ask the question, feel free to ask the question about whether or not it needs to be revised. So in general, the answer is yes, go ahead and make revisions before you submit plans. But I don't feel like in this particular set of revisions that there was anything so earth-shattering that we couldn't work around it with designers. So, and that's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but that's what we got.
All right. The next question: do we have a GDOT approved way of printing in open roads, or should we still use GDOT on MicroStation V8 for future submittals? When the OpenBridge workspace is published, it will have a way to plot using the previous drivers that worked in MicroStation V8i. So when the workspace is published, it will have the standard way that the bridge office expects the sheets to be printed.
Okay. In the last question here that we have, I'm going to pass to Doug. I might jump in there as well. Previous versions of the VR Notes program included a PDF that summarized the notes and included the commentary. I found this helpful in creating the general note plans. Would you consider adding it back into the program?
Yeah. I think I didn't. I just missed it, I think. I wasn't sure that we had it in there before, but I will believe the person who's asking the question. And that's certainly it's not a secret. We go ahead and generate the PDF, and so we can post it onto the website.
So one thing there, Doug, is I know in earlier versions of it, we would take that PDF and it'd actually be one of the buttons in the program, like under the help menu, I think. I honestly don't recall if that was something that we could tell it where to find that, or if I had to go through the programmer to get that added to the program. So that'll just be something we have to look into, but it might be that it has to be a separate document, but in previous versions, it was actually included in the program where you could go to the help menu and find it.
Gotcha. Yeah. I'm gonna guess that they don't care. I think as long as they've got access to it. So maybe we'll just dump it into the zip file for downloading. So we'll try to get that remedied and not put it off too long if we can do so.
That's all the questions posted.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody who tuned in today. Hopefully these presentations are still relatively helpful, give you a little bit of an overview. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me specifically, or I'm sure most of you have contacts in the bridge office that you ask questions of. But with that news, have a great Valentine's Day, and we'll talk to you soon.